Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on environmental management with IMSM. I'm Maria Dimitrova, and I'll be talking briefly with regards to environmental management and how important it is to our society and wider public as well. Before we get started, just let me mention that we might have some issues with the connection today. We don't know why we've been suffering all day long with our live sessions. So your mics and cameras are disabled. This is to improve our connectivity. But the chat is open. So if you'd like to make any question, to ask any questions, to make any comments, etc., please feel free. We're streaming live on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So this is quite a hands-on session, meaning that we have prepared 2 exercises for you nearly at the end of this expose. I'll ask a couple of questions and I'll explain the expected answers. So then we'll open a Q&A session for those of you who have sent us some questions. You're also very welcome to request a free consultancy session. We offer those to our attendees, so please do not hesitate. You'll see our email address at the end of the session. It is marketing@imsm.com. And as I say, we expect that we expect a couple of issues with the connection. However, I hope we'll be able to overcome these challenges. So let's get started then. Well, we're here basically because organizations are increasingly interested in achieving and demonstrating good environmental performance by controlling the impact of their activities, their products and services might have on the environment. And for this, many organizations choose to implement an environmental management system based on the ISO 14001 standard. Basically, environmental management is not new to business. It started in the 1990s. So back then, organizations usually did build up environmental management systems, but according to their own criteria and parameters. So now we have an international standard that covers, that offers basically the set of best practices available worldwide. But here the question is not exactly why organizations go with ISO 14001. Basically, we know it. This is an ISO standard, widely known, etc. The question here is why organizations are so keen to comply with environmental requirements and to build efficient, well-articulated environmental management systems. And to illustrate it, let's have a tiny bit of history in here. So nowadays we're talking quite a lot about waste, plastic, potential leaks, petrol, etc. But essentially it all comes to global CO2 emissions. So a bit of history, as I say, some 1500 years before the birth of Christ, when the chariots of Moses I brought all of Egypt back under the rule of Thebes, the level of carbon dioxide was about 277 parts per million, or ppm. and remained for many, many years at exactly the same level. Mm, a millennium later, when Buddha attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, it was the same. It was the same 100 years after, when Socrates drained his cup of hemlock. It was nearly the same when the Tang dynasty in China arose, or when the first Muslim caliphate arose in the 7th century. 9 centuries later, nearly the same when the conquistadors conquired the Aztec Empire. So it all changed in the middle of the 19th century. The CEO's level began to rise, but also all the elements, all the factors changed. The population started growing quickly, as well as an unexpected, never seen economic growth started. Having stayed between 275 ppm and 285 ppm for millennia, by the 1910s, the CO2 level had reached 300 ppm. By 2020, it was 412 ppm. In a century or so, a crucial aspect of Earth's workings had undergone a change 100 times greater than had previously been seen in a millennium. So, with this quick lecture in history, apologies for this, and the charts on our screens, we can see quite better why this is so important. What we need is to find ways to ensure that growth does not have to be linked to rising CO2. The issue is quite nicely summed up in this formula here on top of your screens. It is credited to Yoichi Kaya, who's a Japanese energy economist. And the formula links the size of the economy, the scale of emissions, and the amount of carbon in the energy system. As you can see, according to it, emissions are the product of population, GDP per head, energy used per unit of GDP, and carbon emissions from that energy. So, basically speaking, to reduce emissions, one must reduce one or more of those 4 factors. Now, for obvious reasons, private and government action on the climate has concentrated on the last 2. Carbon emissions per unit of energy, or what we commonly know as decarbonization, and energy use per unit of GDP, or efficiency. Well, and here controversy starts, because some say it is time to look at the first 2, and that is not exactly ideal. Well, we have illustrated with the formula and the graphics pretty well the point of non-return we're reaching and the magnitude of its potential impact. So, apologies for that. This is why organizations turn to ISO 14001, because the standard offers a robust framework to build up an efficient environmental management system. The purpose of the standard is to provide organizations with such a framework in order to protect the environment and to respond to changing environmental conditions in balance with socioeconomic needs. The standard specifies requirements that enable an organization to achieve the intended outcomes it sets for its environmental management system. So the good thing is that because this is an ISO standard, it benefits from several elements such as the typical systematic approach ISO standards mandate. So uh, a systematic approach helps gather information, helps offer a reliable way to build success over the long term and create options for contributing to sustainable development. How? Well, it enables for protecting the environment, mitigating the potential adverse effects of our actions. It assists the organization in the fulfillment of compliance obligations, as well contractual obligations. It helps enhance environmental performance and create better environmental culture within the organization and outside, because we are talking ISO standards. ISO standards help us identify all interested parties, which are all organizations and individuals that our actions that can affect us with their actions, but also all the organizations and the individuals that we can affect with our actions. It is to be highlighted that we can thus control and influence the way we design our products and services, we manufacture, we distribute down the supply chain, we consume or we dispose, by using a life cycle perspective that can prevent environmental impacts from being unintentionally shifted elsewhere within the life cycle. And by doing so, we get substantial financial and operational benefits. An important element as well is the improved communication. The standard is rigorous about communication, and communication must be well articulated externally and internally. So the standard helps us identify how to do it, the best ways for us to articulate it. So in terms of practicality, where do we start? We start with the scope of our system. Organizations have total freedom and flexibility to define the scope of the environmental management system. What the purpose? What is the purpose of doing it? The purpose is to determine the limits of the organization within which the environmental management system will be applied. Once we do it, all our activities, products and services that are within that scope must be included in the system. Now, it's very important to know that the credibility of our system depends on the scope established by our organization. Thus, if a part of the organization is excluded from the scope of our system, we must be able to explain and document this exclusion. So, because we're talking an ISO standard, we also benefit from the typical way ISO management systems are implemented and made available to people and work via the Deming cycle, or the famous PDCA cycle, which consists in planning what we want to do, doing what we have planned for, checking how we have done it, and act upon any deviations or in case we have identified new opportunities for improvement. How? Again, by planning what we want to do, we do what we have planned for, we check and we act upon any deviations or new opportunities for improvement. Years ago, the Deming cycle was represented as a PDCA cycle. Nowadays, we put in the middle the concept of leadership. Why? Because leadership is essential to the success of your environmental management system. So, two are the success factors, and now we'll be getting into it. But again, first, do what you say and say what you do. That's the essence of ISO standards. And two, get your top management fully committed and involved. This would be the only way you can succeed with your management system. So, again, success factors: leadership, commitment, and responsibilities. The standards require that resources, functions, responsibilities, and authority are established and assigned and documented. So a good way to do it is by using a manual. It's not, the manual is no longer required with the new latest edition of the standard. However, it's a nice way to get it all summarized, all referenced, and in one place. It helps a lot. If you don't like calling it a manual, please feel free to call it whatever you may like, a reference book, logbook, whatever. But in essence, it is always a good idea to have everything referenced in one place, just for you to work with greater confidence. So, let's carry on. As we've mentioned, there are 4 essential stages and the top management involved in all of them. In the first place, with planning, the standards will help us identify the environmental aspects and based on those environmental aspects that we can control and we can influence, we'll get them identified and evaluated. So based on the environmental aspects identified and evaluated, we'll build up our environmental policy, our environmental programs, our environmental emergency plans, etc. So it would allow us to make sure that significant environmental aspects are set up as a priority when we set our objectives and goals as well. Well, periodically, environmental aspects should be identified, and a couple of elements need to be taken into account, such as normal, abnormal, and emergency operating conditions. In special circumstances, such as the development of new activities, products, services, changes in process, changes are very important to be controlled, by the way. It is necessary to re-identify the environmental aspects of our organizations. It is customary for such identifications to be carried out on an annual basis, although there are organizations that prefer doing it shorter terms. So it all depends on you. The standard also helps us work on the resources for support required. And I would like to highlight the need for the awareness to be prioritized as well. Many organizations tend to forget that training is essential. So ISO 14001 highlights how important awareness becomes to make a management system work efficiently. So, to ensure that the organization staff and subcontractors have adequate training and professional competences, uh, their training must be properly planned and documented. What can prompt organizations to carry on with further trainings? Well, nearly everything from technologies, new activities, materials, raw materials we change or newly acquire, newly identified environmental aspects, newly identified environmental risks, to legal and contractual requirements, or new staff, new personnel joining our organizations. And let's not forget that one of the fundamental requirements of an environmental management system is the need for an effective internal and external environmental communication to be carried out. So internal communication must be multi-directional, and this is the weakest link in communication because many organizations just assume that they communicate efficiently, and sometimes they may be quite wrong. So please double and triple check the way you articulate your internal communications. So when we talk internal communication channels, please make sure that they are established and allow employees, subcontractors as well, to make suggestions, to make criticism, to make you, to send you any suggestions, proposals for improvement they may like to. So those people's they're out there every single day working for you guys. So they're the best suited people to see something and let you know practically real time. So you just need to benefit from what they can see and tell you. Well, operations are heavily well developed in standard. Through operational control, we can guarantee we're on top of our compliance with legislation, pollution prevention, and continuous improvement. So, when I say on top, it doesn't mean that we'll have 100% compliance. Will never have, for instance, a leak or whatever. That's not true. We'll continue facing some challenges, but operational control does allow us to very quickly identify our weak links and act upon. So, the continuous operational control is a tool that allows us to quickly detect and correct possible deviations with respect to the environmental criteria or specifications we have adopted. So, any industrial activity, no matter how controlled it may be, is by default associated with a series of risks of greater or lesser severity that can affect people, facilities, and the environment. So, planning and control allows us, as I say, to very quickly act upon and prevent further challenges from happening. With regards to evaluation, now we'll get slightly into it to explain furthermore. So evaluation is part of the process. We'll need to ensure that we monitor what we do and we ensure conformity, and we can benefit positively from our internal and external audits. How? Well, monitoring, measurement, auditing are the elements that actually make sure our system works. Well, management reviews are very important. Top management should review the organization's environmental management system at planned intervals to ensure it's suitable, continuously suitable, adequate, and effective. What should they be looking at? Well, first of all, the status of previous management actions and reviews, any changes in external and internal issues that are relevant to the management system, to the environmental management system, any new needs and expectations of our interested parties. And remember, our interested parties are all those organizations and the individuals that can affect us, and all those organizations and the individuals that we can affect. So, top management during the review will make sure that significant environmental aspects are considered. Risks and opportunities are also considered, always the pair of it, risks and opportunities, because risks can condition opportunities. And fortunately they do. But opportunities, if not assessed and evaluated, may bring in some risks. So we need to have a heavy look at both risks and opportunities. So management reviews will include an evaluation on the extent to which the environmental objectives have been achieved. We'll need to see all trends in non-conformities and corrective actions, monitoring and measurement results, compliance obligations, audit results, internal and external audit results, the adequacy of our resources, all communications from interested parties, including complaints. Most importantly, complaints. Your best information, actually, you can find it in the complaints. So do not forget the opportunities for continual improvement. So what should we expect to come out of the management reviews? So, in the first place, conclusions on the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of our environmental management system. We expect also decisions related to the continual improvement opportunities. If any need for changes in the environmental management system, including resources and communication, we do expect decisions to be made. Actions when environmental objectives have not been achieved. Opportunities to improve as well. The integration of our environmental system with other business processes, if necessary. We expect to have a better picture of any implications for the strategic direction of the organization on these particular aspects. So, many times you'll be asked, what do we do when we have nonconformities? Well, it happens, nonconformities occur, so we need to deal with those. What do we need to do when we have nonconformities? Well, in the first place, we need to react to the nonconformity. We can't just forget it. And we need to take steps to control and correct it. We need to deal with the consequences, including mitigating adverse environmental impacts. So, we don't stop there, though. We need to evaluate the need for actions to eliminate the causes of our nonconformities so they do not repeat nor occur elsewhere. How do we do it? Well, we review the nonconformity, first of all. We determine the causes for this nonconformity. We look for any similar nonconformities. We try to determine if they exist, have existed, or could potentially occur. And once we have evaluated, we implement any necessary actions. So, it's really necessary to have a look around and evaluate what we do with our environmental management system. So, just to be able, as promised, to get our hands on, we have two scenarios. So let me just bring the first one for you. Let's have a look at the scenario on our screens. Apparently, we have an organization which is considering implementing and certifying an ISO 14001 standard, a system in conformity with the standard, sorry. So here we go. Just a minute for you to read it. Well, first of all, it is a very good thing that the organization has decided to implement an environmental management system in conformity with the standard. However, the approach may not be quite correct. Why? Because ISO 14001 is a particularly interesting standard. Many organizations think that if they have already 9001, which is quality management, 14001 with regards to the scope will behave the same way. So we extend the scope of our management system to an external interested party. For instance, we focus on the customer satisfaction. That's the common denominator in ISO 9001. All our branches or our offices may be well within the scope, and then we're after customer satisfaction, and that's all we can carry on our audit in order to guarantee customer satisfaction. With ISO 14001, we'll need to include every particular location and plan for a separate audit for each of our locations. Why? Because we need to make sure that we work in conformity with the standard in each particular location. The fact that in one office or facility we may be working in conformity with the standard doesn't guarantee by default that 100 miles away, although the processes are exactly the same, will be equally compliant. So, particularly with 14,001, we need to put within the scope each location we operate in, and each location must be audited separately. So, next exercise. Because many organizations think that ISO standards entail huge amounts of paperwork. Here we have a list of elements that may or may not need to be included as documented information. Again, this is a simple exercise just to illustrate that nowadays ISO standards are flexible, adaptive, and run smoothly, that they do not require for the extensive documentation the standards required many years ago. Since 2015, when the latest ISO 9001 version was published, things started changing. So the standards, the ISO standards, become more flexible and offer the opportunity for much smoother implementation and certification. Now, apparently, many will think that all of the listed elements must be documented. Not all of them. So we'll need to document our scope. We'll need to document our environmental policy. But for instance, we don't need to document in writing, although it's always a good idea to do it. We don't need to list our stakeholders. We don't need to explain how big our organization is. We don't need to describe the complexity of our processes. So, as I say, with the standards in hand, you can just go through and see which is the minimum documentation required. You'll be surprised. It is not that much. And as I say, even the manual is no longer required to be created, although we heavily defend the thesis that a manual may be a very good tool to have, just to make sure that you have a reference book when you audit your system and when your system is being audited by a third independent party. Well, benefits of ISO. I like to say that there are as many benefits of ISO implementations as organizations, but for me, the most important benefits is the fact that ISO 14001 is a certifiable standard. What does it mean? It means that if you decide to implement your system in conformity with the standard, you can do it internally. You can call IMSM. We hope you do. We're very good at helping organizations implementing systems. But in any way, you audit it internally, you make it work, and then you can invite a third-party independent organizations. That's not gonna be you, that's not gonna be us, because we need to avoid the conflict of interest. We can't do it. But independent body scan. So you can invite them to come and audit externally, independently, your system. And then, when successful, I'm not saying if, because if you work with us, it's a question of when you go successfully through the certification audit, you'll get a worldwide recognized certificate saying that you actually work using best practice in environmental management. So, this said, thank you very much for your time. Marketing, do we have any questions today? I don't think we have.
Maria, we've had nothing come through.
Oh, brilliant.
Not today.
So,
Normally we do, but not today.
not today. So, early evening here in the UK, guys. And good morning again, and have a lovely day there in the States and Canada. So, Maria Dimitrova for IMSM and Carolina as well with me helping behind the scenes. See you soon, and thank you very much.